Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast from Backlot Banter where we view and review every single Best Picture winner from all of history, all of them. We're so nearly there to finishing every single Best Picture winner. My name is Timo. I'm joined by Abram, Tanner, and Tucker, and today we are going to be discussing the 1945 Best Picture winner directed by Billy Wilder. It's The Lost Weekend. It's a pretty dark film. It's a challenging movie, but I do believe we've got some good stuff to say about it. Before we discuss this film, I want to remind you of what happened last episode because we rejoined the Quest for the Bestest, the main series last time, when we found out that Everything Everywhere All at Once won the 2023 Best Picture Award. And so thus we talked about it on the show. We all sat down for a nice in-person conversation for once and hashed out our thoughts on the film. But more importantly, we gave it a rank on our big list, and it went at the number 8th place, which is like way up there. Really good.
Yeah.
Rocketing to the top.
Top 10 almost.
Yeah, it is in the top 10.
Some might say.
Many
have been saying this.
Yeah. Numbers are still out on that one.
Sources argue that the film is in the top 10. So congratulations, Everything Everywhere. If you missed any of our Oscars coverage, check that out. It's all on the rest of our channel. There's playlists for it. You can find it also in the description. And now I want to hear from Abram because he has pulled a featured comment that I believe is a special one this time.
Yes.
They're always special, Timo.
Yes,
They
you're
are
right.
always special, but this one is doubly special because we've adopted a new child, and their name is
Welcome to the
Max
family.
Fisher, who put an inordinate number of comments on Quest videos over the last couple days.
Yeah, rivaling our longest commenting other children, Max Fisher has just sprung to the top of the list of like easily like 30 plus comments in the last few weeks.
It's
Congrats,
fun.
Max. We appreciate it.
It's fun watching people discover Quest and dig into the catalog. And it's even more fun when they share their thoughts like this.
Holy schmoly, there's 140 episodes, 114 episodes or whatever.
And this one comes from our latest when we were unpacking Everything Everywhere's Oscar win and placing on the list. And Max says, "Such an amazing movie, but it has a visual cuteness that pops up between me and a full embrace. Swiss Army Man has the same issue, though I was very impressed by that as well. I don't want to diminish this effort. It is clever and exciting and new, and I'm happy for all of its wins. Even Jamie Lee Curtis, who has been consistent over her career but never magic. I will not love this movie, but I enjoyed it and admired it. I appreciate how you situate this movie in Academy significance."
Thank you for your appreciation. I appreciate it.
We aim to please here on the Quest for the Bestest. Okay.
And we always do. There's never a comment criticizing us.
Never.
No, never.
You know what? We're doing
Not
good.
one that sticks around anyway.
Yeah,
we always delete that criticism. We're very Stalin-esque in our deletion and erasure of negative comments.
Speaking of Stalin-esque, I'm going to go to 1945, the end of World War II, and give a little plot synopsis for this film because I've taken up the mantle. I'm going to champion it tonight. I was tweeting today that I think this is like one of the most forgotten Best Picture winners out there. Nobody knows this movie exists. And I'm here to make you remember it because I think it's worth remembering. But this film is about Ray Milland, who plays a character named Don Birnam. Got to get all these names right because they're all up here in my head, twisting her. For 2 years, I've been thinking about this movie, and now it's time to get it all out. He is a chronic alcoholic who, despite his brother and his girlfriend's attempts to help him out and get him off of the sauce, he will not give up. And when his brother leaves town for the weekend to go back to their hometown farm, he is left alone in New York City to his own devices, and his own devices say that they want to drink. And so the film chronicles a 4-day bender of him as he wanders around, convinces his bartender friend to loan him more money, tries to get alcohol, pawn his stuff so he can buy more alcohol. He falls down some stairs, ends up in a hospital, has a totally freaky hallucination sequence, and then eventually the family members come back home and are able to, in a very tense climactic moment, kind of come together and hint that we're on the path to recovery, that Don could maybe be saved. We get to hear about Don trying to be a writer throughout the film, as well as his interactions with some other characters. I think that this film has a lot to say, which is a me giving analysis, which I'll stop and save for after we've given our initial thoughts. But did I leave anything out? Y'all want to add anything?
No,
I think you got it.
Covered
That's
all
quite
that.
good, Timo.
Second time's a
Yeah,
charm.
and I think that it was pretty easy for you to cover all that because while you mentioned a lot of side stories that do factor into the larger plot, this is a very simple movie in terms of each sequence and the thoughts behind them and the actions of our main character. It maintains a pretty consistent status across the course of the film, which is I want alcohol, I'm going to find alcohol, I'm going to drink alcohol, I'm going to maybe regret drinking alcohol, but then kind of enjoy that I drank the alcohol because I'm drunk.
And then tomorrow I'm going to wake up profoundly hungover and hate my life.
But then find more alcohol.
But then find more alcohol, yeah.
Yeah, and that loop is very dark, and it is a very, pun intended, sobering reality of what it's like to have this kind of addiction and be stuck. It's really just a movie about a man who's lost in the sauce, and guess what? That's not a good thing for poor old Don Birnam. But while I really do like this film, and I think that it feels very ahead of its time. This feels like almost like a movie that would have come out in like the 70s around something like Midnight Cowboy, that is tackling these social issues and the dark psyche of the American populace. I don't think that it sticks out too much to me because the themes that it's tackling of that alcoholism is bad and that you should find support in family members and people around you. These are themes that I find pretty basic. And because the situation of the film is just a guy in New York, and I don't find the characters around him to be particularly compelling, I think this film is good, ahead of its time, impressive in some regards, but it doesn't stick with me at all. And I watched it like 2 days ago, and I'm already sort of forgetting what happened because it just feels kind of basic.
Well, I know someone didn't watch it 2 days ago. I want to hear Abram's thoughts, who just viewed the film.
Yeah, I mean, Tucker, I echo in large part what you're saying about the timely quality of this film, both in its perennial themes and sort of its style, which does not necessarily feel like I'm watching a film from the 40s. I think that the cinematography in particular helps a lot to make the film feel very inventive.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really interesting shots going to the bottom of a glass, the camera tumbling down the stairs with Don, all of these things. I think keep the film feeling kind of out of time in a compelling way. And I think where I might disagree with you is I think the themes and the characterization here is a lot more nuanced, personally, as I'd like to get into. But yeah, it is also still missing a component for me, and I think I am zeroing in on it being the larger situation that Don is in terms of his career and his relationships, which I feel like are what give the narrative a lot of its strength, but aren't really leaned into enough to illustrate the ways in which Don's life has ramifications on the people around him. We see it in part, but I think I would have wanted more. I think the best parts of the film are when the people around Don have to reconcile with what his life has become.
Yeah.
And I just think I would have wanted more of that. I think that would have kept the film feeling a little bit wider in a way that, as you're saying, Tucker, might move beyond some of its more basic elements. So I ended up enjoying it a lot, but it's good. It's good, and it's good, and I like it.
Welcome to the boat, buddy.
Yeah. It is good and I like it. I concur, Abram and Tucker. And if we're following this rabbit hole of, sort of talking about it in, a film from 1945 tackling sort of perennial themes, I think it is interesting because I agree. I think that the thematic stuff here is good and surprising for 1945, and there's a reason for that because as I and Timo apparently have both delved into the trivia holes surrounding The Lost Weekend, this was a groundbreaking film in 1945, both in thematic context and in some of the tertiary elements of filmmaking, which we'll get to in due time. But to refocus, I would say that, yes, the themes are good here. They are perennial even. But I feel as though that they don't really cut to the beating heart of our character as much as I wish they would have. And as much as I think other films that specifically tackle alcoholism as a mental illness that have, such as a couple years ago we got Another Round from Denmark, I think.
Leslie. Tanner? What about
No,
that
no. I see. And I was thinking about that one too, but I think that one's more a character study broadly, and
No,
not
of course,
specifically about
yeah,
her
just
alcoholism.
messing
But
with
like another round gets into like how this is a substitute for joy in the people in alcoholics. Whereas this, and I could be wrong here, and we can discuss this, but I feel like the conclusion it comes to is he has writer's block and he feels that he is inadequate to his previous life, and that's why he drinks. Where I think there's another layer or two to cut into there that we don't really do.
You are so right that there is another layer to Don's character, which I will get to when we dive
another
into
round almost.
Yeah, another little circle on the bar.
Okay, all right. Oh,
I quite like this
vicious
movie.
Little circle.
Vicious little no start, no end. I like this movie. I'm championing it here because I do what I believe about it being kind of forgotten. I really believe. It's not my favorite Wilder movie though, and what you guys have to say about some of the side characters kind of just being there, and this question about what's really going on with Don at the core, it isn't answered in the movie, and I have the answer from the
novel. Yes, from the novel.
The thing is that Don Birnam's character in the novel is a deeply closeted gay man, and it's pretty obvious in the novel. And in this film, Wilder and Charles Brackett, who also wrote it with him, really struggled to, like, what do you we can't have a gay guy. It's production code. It's not only is it the production code, but it's also the end of World War II. Like they started filming this movie in late 1944, and they got done by the middle of 1945, and so there's like turmoil in the world, and so they can't just. There's no way they're going to be able to make Don Birnam be gay, but it is totally informing all of his character notes because of what what it's based off of.
Yeah.
That's not. I don't know. I don't know how to reconcile with that because it makes it so clear to me why he is how he is, but those elements aren't in the movie, and we got to judge the movie on what it gives us.
Yeah, and I think that layer not being there is that missing puzzle piece, the missing spark that I think I felt lacking, and Abram also felt lacking. In that adds another layer of intrigue to Don's character. His character traits, as they stand in the film, are, believe it or not, alcoholism and also writer's block.
Yeah.
And because of those two things, having problems with his relationships, whether that is his brother or the half-assed romantic interest that he has. And I think that as someone who has seen films about alcoholism, who knows these themes on face level, making him a closeted gay man, I think, does add that level of characterization that makes it stand out from the crowd, that adds that extra element of homophobia and closeted queerness mixed with alcoholism that I think would make it a lot richer, make me want to dive into the psyche of this man a little bit more, because as it stands, I can't include that in my thoughts on the film because it doesn't even make allusions to it.
I'm
minor
going
references.
to try to argue that it does in certain bits, but I'm gonna also be like, if you don't notice these parts, like, you're totally fine. Like you gotta. I was reading the freaking Billy Wilder biography to find out this stuff. Like, I took a class, I dug up a year-old syllabus to find out what my professor was like trying to say about this film, and this is the stuff that has come out of it. So we got. I think we have to take the stance of a viewer, not a scholar, in this instance.
Sure. Let's dive into Don Birnam here as our central character. Because I think, aside from all these slights that we've thrown at the character writing here, I think he is quite well explored. And there are moments here in the script where he does just kind of open his mind up to the audience, and more honestly, the bartender, his friend Nat, is that his name? Nat the bartender? Where he's kind of like just telling him these things about his experience with alcohol, about how his drinking problem really got started, where it came from, the struggles that he's been feeling. I think there are really good bits in here, monologues from Ray Milland about, needing the alcohol around and the feeling of riding drunk, and then even later that's complicated as it's like a specter in his mind that's telling him that he's not good enough, and just have a drink first just to ease that inadequacy in your brain. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. But what did you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, so this is where I probably diverge from Tucker in that I do find there to be an interesting level of nuance here, in that I think you can draw an interesting point of discussion out of the idea that a lack of professional success is what is pushing Don towards, as he titles his memoir, The Bottle. Um, this notion of measuring one's success by one's financial position, which is a recurrent slight against Don throughout the narrative, and particularly in the case of what's his girlfriend's name? I forget. Margarine.
Helen.
When Helen's parents, when Don overhears Helen's parents talk about, like, this guy's 33, he's got no job, he's a fuck up. Like, what's the situation with him, right? I think situating him in a world that is so financially focused as he's trying to explore this creative art, and the conflict there, and the way that vice becomes sort of the only thing he can turn to, as his inadequacy sort of bears down on him both emotionally, interpersonally, socially. I find that to be quite compelling, actually. And to me makes it a little bit more than just, I'm stressed because my writing isn't what it used to be, so now I'm drinking. I think it's more an illustration of what happens when your worth becomes tied to that work. And I think it's executed on quite excellently by the actor whose name I remember,
Ray.
but don't want to share as a test
Ray
of the
Milland.
audience. Ray. He executes moments that are sometimes otherwise sort of static in their filmmaking quite masterfully. I think of the moments, for instance, when he's just talking to Nat and the camera's just holding steady, or when he reveals himself as a drunk to Margarine. Helen.
In a flashback sequence, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's just standing in front of the window and the desk, and we're just holding on this shot. I think he's got a lot of screen presence, and I think whether we're in those quieter moments or he's screaming as he's hallucinating a mouse being eaten by a bat, that level of
Not that scary.
that level of commitment to the role and belief in the emotional charges of the character, I think makes this work vice relationship even more potent, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I was going to talk a little bit about the performance from Milland. Abram, you basically said what I was going to talk about. I want to just add, like, in the nuance, there's moments when he goes to Nat's bar and he hasn't had anything to drink. He's just very stiff and very, like, irritated. The shift in his performance from when he hasn't been drinking to when he has been drinking is, I think it is noticed. It's very palpable on screen, and it carries with, like, a lot of weight. It's like, well, it's almost like he loses weight when he starts to drink. His shoulders get more relaxed, and he's able to, I think about this scene with Gloria towards the earlier part of the film, this sort of vamp, we don't really know what her deal is, woman on the in the bar, and he is normally kind of asshole-ish, stuck up to his family, but then he gets a couple drinks. He's like this sweet-talking, nice guy to Gloria, and he's like, hey, babe, like, yeah, I'll call you. Like, we're going on a date together. Like, he's like a different person, so almost when he's in between when he's drinking and when he's drunk and when he's not, as well as these scenes.
Inebriated.
I really like the scenes where he walks along the street and he's just, like, shuffling out in the blaring sunlight, and he's just, the desperation that is on his face. I happen to know he's wearing a lot of makeup in those scenes, but, like, it's just like he looks like shit. He looks sick. He looks bad in these images. And you're right, he carries a lot of weight, and I think his portrayal of addiction is sensitive and personal and works for me a lot.
Yeah, the variety, I think, is what makes the performance so memorable in the alcoholism and how the alcohol is impacting him, how recently he's had it, how much of it he's had, the location he was at when he had it, the people around him. There's so many factors that factor into the way he's going to be acting in each given moment. And so you have to always be considering these things when you think about the way that he's approaching a conversation, what elements of his past or his story or his personality is he going to be expressing in these scenes. It's because of those convergence of factors, and the variety swinging from the most depressed, confused guy you can possibly see looking sickly, or I think one of my favorite moments of film, he's just getting drunk and he's talking about the feeling of being drunk and how the weight is lifted off his shoulders, and there's this glorious feeling. The lights are shining from above, and hallelujah, I'm finally the person that I want to be, because alcohol pushes away the dark thoughts. But then, of course, as alcoholism, the disease, is wont to do, those dark thoughts return even heavier with the power of alcohol, and he loses his sense of self, and he doesn't quite understand the way that he's approaching situations. And I really love how the movie sort of slides and shifts through these different emotions, because it's the drunken way that he is approaching his life over the course of this weekend, is going in and out of being drunk and hungover and a little too sober and being frustrated with being sober and trying to push back against it. It's very slippery, but I think that is that's a good mark of good acting and good writing, when I can feel the changes of someone being drunk, because I'm so used to watching movies, especially from this time, where someone gets drunk and then they just say some funny lines or stumble around for a little bit, or they burp, or they have a bag in their hand, and that's not portraying the disease of alcoholism or being drunk, which is not a disease, but leads to that, obviously. I think this movie is just so much more, obviously so much more focused on that, but it succeeds so much more in that. I've never been drunk before, but I can feel this guy being drunk.
It really does come down to Millen's performance, and I think it is quite good. And he did win Best Actor for this role this year as well. And
wins and noms.
I'll do some wins and noms. Yeah, I'll spin off into that. But I do have I have trivia associated with that, and a different thing that Tucker mentioned. But I'll get to it all in due time. Wins and noms. It won Best Picture. That's why we're talking about it here. Ray Milland won Best Actor. Billy Wilder won Best Director here. It also won Best Adapted Screenplay from Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett. It was nominated, but didn't win, Best Black and White Cinematography, Best Editing, and Best Music. And we can get to all those noms in due time.
We ought to.
But I did want to talk about Millen's approach to this role, because in doing some research here, and Timo, feel free to jump in with trivia at any point that you have as well. But I was really
I'll be your little hype man. I'll be your trivia hype man.
True, yeah. So Millen really took an interesting approach to this, a quite modern acting approach, I would say as well, because he was sort of this he's this matinee show rom-com kind of guy before this role, who wasn't accustomed to doing heavy dramatic roles like this, and he was really apprehensive to take this role, but ultimately he did, I think at the behest of his wife. But to prepare for the role, he actually did check himself into the Bellevue Hospital in New York, the very same one that is depicted in this film, and it went into the drunk tank for an evening to sort of get the feel and absorb the feeling of being in there, the horror of being in there for a night. And of course, being 1945, things went horribly awry. There was a person who was brought in the middle of the night who was making a huge scene, and in all the confusion, he tried to get out because he didn't know what was going to happen. He's wearing a robe. He's barefoot. He goes out onto the street, very similar to the sequence that happens in the film, actually.
Eerily so.
He goes out onto the street. A cop sees him. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing out here? You need to get back in that hospital, buddy." And so he gets returned to the hospital. And they have to it takes him hours to explain between the doctors and the cops. And he's like, "No, I'm an actor. I'm not supposed to be in here," and all this stuff. So
I can imagine them being like, "Horse shit, buddy."
Yeah.
Apparently,
and also
he was
ahead,
morose and grumpy on set. He was not really that fun to be around, but he did get I guess his grumpiness made its way into the performance quite well.
Yeah, his grumpiness also made its way onto the Oscar stage, apparently, because he did not give a speech when he won his Oscar.
Huh.
He's kind of acknowledged the applause and left.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, and if we want to transition into this film's sort of the 1945 depiction of alcoholism, I think I have some historical context to give to this as well. And it ties into the reception of the film. Because up until this point, and as Tucker mentioned, when you're watching films from the 30s and 40s, when a character gets drunk, it is it's always for laughs, essentially. It's always played for comedy. The drunk character, the alcoholic character, is always the butt of the joke. And that's what people in 1945 were attuned to, were accustomed to, was a character of this nature being a joke. And Billy Wilder says so. In the early screenings of the films, people were laughing when he's like hanging the bottle out the window, when his brother is dumping the bottle down the sink and things like that. There's some interesting quotes here. I'll see if I can grab some here.
As you pull your, I'll say that after they had started making this movie, they're kind of halfway done, 3/4 of the way done shooting it, and like the Paramount guy, the front office execs as well, the idiots in the front office are like, they do not want this movie. They want it shut down. They think it's horrible. The test screenings are going really poorly because they don't have the score in it at that part. And so Wilder's like super depressed and like super unhappy. And I think he takes a break from the project for a little while to come back to it later. And then once they get all the elements together, they're like, oh, this is actually really good. And the front office eventually agrees with them.
Yeah. Some quotes here. The reception ranged from, quote, disgusting to, quote, boring. Wilder even claimed that one patron left the theater proclaiming, I've sworn off, never again. To which he replied, you'll never drink again? And then the patron said, no, I'll never see another picture again.
Movie so bad it's made him swear off film.
There was also somebody who wrote that the movie was great, but the stuff about drinking and alcoholism should be omitted. Yeah,
that is some classic 40s movie watching view. Man,
Timo, that's some classic YouTube comment. Movie analysis.
But ultimately to sort of get back into our thoughts on this and away from the trivia here, I do think that it is a very harrowing depiction of alcoholism, and that comes down to the filmmaking largely. The direction from Billy Wilde here is pretty astounding, even though it is quite the departure from the other work I've seen from him, Double Indemnity, Some Like It Hot, sort of these very high octane or zany comedies or mysteries of that nature. But this one is relatively pared down, except for those moments where it really needs to dial in to depict the sequences of alcoholism. Some key moments stick out to me are like when we are zooming into to this glass of whiskey that Don has on the table. The camera is literally being consumed by the alcohol just as Don is, as he's sitting back in this recliner and taking it in. And it's the score as well, I think, is also really cool. Tucker mentioned when we were watching yesterday that it gives this very like haunting feel as Don is being like haunted by his addiction. Yeah. I think it's all very interesting how it flows through the script and the filmmaking itself.
Miklos Rosa, the composer of the score?
Would that composer have done anything else I would recognize, or just...
He
just happen to know the name because
he did a lot of Wilder movies, so you recognize the Double Indemnity score. That's Rosa also. This crew is largely the same as Double Indemnity, and I really see these two films linked together as this kind of as Wilder's expression of film noir. My thoughts about the score is that I really love the score. The theremin is going hard as hell. This is some hard-ass theremin. And it does give us that really eerie, and it makes the score not really sound like... If you were a 1946 movie goer, you are not going to hear a theremin in any of the movies you're going and seeing. And you go see this one.
It was the first use of it, really.
Yeah. And so you get that new instrument, which is so eerie and different, and it just doesn't sound like anything you would have been used to seeing. And then you have a well-written score that features prominently in this film. I remember I was reading some trivia. Wilder said that in an early interview, he said that he wanted the film to be 70% silent. I don't think he got there, but he was aiming for a lot of the film to be communicated through visual and auditory filmic means rather than dialogue and character.
Interesting. Yeah, the score, I think, does add a lot to this film in terms of setting it apart from its contemporaries, and obviously the theremin, as Tanner mentioned, being the first use of that. But it's interesting to think about what we contextualize the use of theremin in score for, primarily with the sort of haunting melodies played in cheap B sci-fi movies in the 50s and 60s. It's like, whoa, they came from outer space. Oh, there's something coming out of the ground. Oh, nuclear radiation. That is what that sound of that instrument connects to in my mind. And that sort of horror, creeping, unease feeling transitions one to one of a guy looking at a bottle and feeling the specter of alcoholism haunting him behind him. Like, that is a really interesting connection that I think makes those scenes all the more unnerving. And maybe it was that this obviously started use of theremin and that was popularized and people sort of started associating it with unease or haunting specters of whatever because of this movie. But my thought process is backwards on that because I had experienced a bunch of B50s and 60s movies before that. And I was like, oh, whoa, whoa. I'm getting a sense of like Attack of the Giant Leeches and like Day of the Triffids here. And that was obviously not intended, but I think it helped me to like grasp this onto something that I had experience with.
Yeah, I mean, you guys basically said everything I would have said about the score, but the camera work I want to dial in on a little bit more, because the framing of so many shots here is quite remarkable in its communication of uncomfortable intimacy, non-sexual intimacy, like when we see Don wake up and it's just a hyper close shot of his eye.
Can I trivia?
Sure.
According to
Lord.
Ed Seekov at the time, that was the most intense and complicated close-up shot ever done. The camera lens was 6 inches away from Milan's eye, and he was told not to breathe at all, or else the shot would get messed up.
Yeah, and I think it's really remarkable, and as you guys are saying, feeding into this overarching sense of unease, as though we are seeing something we shouldn't be seeing, as though it's too close or it holds a power over us. And to that point, there's a lot of really excellent low-angle framing that communicates how Don is subservient to so many different forces. One example I really like is when he meets the guy in the hospital.
Bim.
And he's
Bim Nolan.
Bim
Nolan is explaining...
What a character.
Yeah, he's explaining, you're going to be back here in all of this. And the shot is really low, and he's so powerful in the frame. And it really accentuates, as the low-angle shot does, the sense of authority. But I think the most effective one, which is also quite noir in its use of shadow, is when... I forget what debaucherous activity we've returned from, but we go to sleep on the couch, and we wake up, and we see the alcohol bottle in the lamp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The overhead lamp, and the shadows reflected on the ceiling, and we're just low in the frame, and the alcohol is imposing. It's very basic and fundamental, but incredibly effective shot composition that furthers the mood of the piece. And so, to me, that did a lot of the heavy lifting. In addition to, if I can pivot a little bit, the dialogue writing, which I think is quite excellent, and it dovetails with what we were saying about performance earlier. The ways that these cutting remarks like, I'm not a drinker, I'm a drunk, are punctuated so effectively. I think that the success of the film can really be put in like a little square box, which with defined corners of performance, shot composition, dialogue writing, and score. To me, those are what make this film rigid.
Yeah.
That's not the right word. I don't know what the word is. But box metaphor
The
fails.
box. I love the box metaphor. I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that
in the
there's some really great just like nails of dialogue that Wilder and Brackett hammer in here. The drinker drunk line that Abram mentioned is a great one.
Every single scene with Gloria, I think. I want to talk about Gloria because there's great trivia for her.
Yeah.
Continue.
But I also love when Wick has a line where he's sort of lambasting Don for falling back into his addiction time after time, and doing just the one drink is all I need. One drink is all I need. Where he says a line that is, it's like stepping off a roof and expecting to fall only one floor. Yeah. I think that's a great line. There's just a lot of those throughout here that really just get to the heart of what the film is saying about alcoholism and addiction. That I think it really lends itself to that timeless-ish feel of this film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I do think that there's a layer of creativity to those things of we could have a version of The Lost Weekend made today that is much more about the disease, alcoholism, and the medical aspects of it, but that was not what they were going to talk about, or maybe even didn't know completely about back in the 40s. And I think that the noir nature of this film does, even though I think it's ahead of its time, park it squarely in the past in my mind. If I'm looking at noir shots and I'm listening to a theremin score and I'm listening to lines of dialogue and people dressed like that, I'm like, this is a past version of what alcoholism was like. And I find that to be compelling and sort of this, not alternate history because it's real history, but alternate perspective on alcoholism through the lens of history. But I also do think the film is balanced in it, if it's focused on alcoholism, with a little bit of Billy Wilder light touch in a few comedic shots, and Gloria and Nat being characters with silly moments. Obviously, Gloria's dialogue and use of shorthand lingo, like ridic and so like this could have been something that people were saying in the 90s. And like again, like lingo at the time is a flat circle. Things are coming back, and in terms of a shot that I wanted to point out, there's this.
Why do you threaten our friendship so by using these truncated words?
Oh my god, that exactly. See, like that is basically played for a laugh in that sequence, and a lot of moments in that scene. The one that sticks out to me is
but
when,
in classic Brackett and Wilder fashion, even the shortened lines come back later when we wrap up Gloria's character arc at the end of the film.
True, the shot that sticks out to me is when the older man who's about to, go off with Gloria leaves, and Nat sticks his hand out with a glass between the chairs, like coming off frame, and I'm like, that is a funnily framed image. Wilder is playing it for a laugh. He knows it is comedically inclined, and so I still feel like him trying to put levity, but those moments are fleeting, which I think makes the dourness of 85% of the film feel even more dour.
And then what I'm gonna say about those the lightness and the light scenes, I think that they come from the women in this film. Particularly Gloria gives this. Gloria is an interesting beast in the movie because, from all intents and purposes, she is a prostitute. But the film cannot say that, and even the censors, Joseph Breen knew that she was a prostitute and was like, what the hell, dude? You can't put this in your movie. And Wilder's like, if you keep pissing me off about this, I'm going to not send you the rest of the script, which is what he did. But in this film, Wilder, who's playing this character as a prostitute, I think complicates our depiction of alcoholism and intertwines it with these other, other social issues in the film. And the way that Gloria like cozies up to and encourages, she gives him money. She's kind of the opposite of Helen. His most
she falls from very easily.
Yeah, and so I think that, well, beyond the fact that Gloria cast Doris Dowling because they were hooking up after shooting, the part of Gloria plays an important role in making Don I think a more compelling character, because he has this other side that's more nefarious and more like what is going on with it, and it's mysterious. I like Gloria's character. I think she's very energetic and totally steals the show whenever she's in the screen.
Yeah. I wish that we had more of Helen if we want to talk about side characters, because I think she poses a really interesting, empathetic character that we don't get at all in this film aside from her. Even Gloria is not really entirely aware of Don's problem. Wick is
willfully ignorant or something.
Yeah,
like
potentially. Nat is sort of enabling him even when he has no money. It confounds me, the scene where he's like, all right, now here's a shot, but get out of here. I don't really understand, and then Bim Nolan, the nurse, is sort of like flippant with he's like, you'll be back here. They all are. This guy's been in here for 30 years or whatever. But Helen is a really interesting character here because she is severely empathetic and, doggedly so. She is like, despite everything, despite the falling off and going back onto the wagon of Don, she is with him all the way, and she's like, I'm gonna stick with you. I know you can overcome this addiction, this and this and that. And in the very end, where she comes back and she recognizes that he's planning to kill himself, she like she goes back to his addiction. She's like, here, have a drink first, sort of harkening back to that Don's line earlier of like the other Don is always saying, have a drink first, have a drink first. She's even in that moment wanting to keep Don around, even though that he is this guy who is cheating on her and can be quite rude to her and angry with her when he drinks. I think it is interesting, her like radical empathy towards him and his condition in this film. And I understand the need for him to have his 4-day alone bender in this, but I do wish we got more of her, because I think she's a really interesting foil for his depression.
Yeah.
I find the relationships between Helen and Don, as well as Don and Gloria, to be really unsatisfactory. I don't like them, especially a whole hell of a lot, because you're right, Tanner, in that Helen is incredibly empathetic, and Helen becomes almost our way into the narrative. As like her, we are watching Don, and we come to care about Don despite all of Don's shortcomings, even though we see way more of his depravity than she does. She's really shafted through the narrative, and Don is never asked to reconcile the
his treatment
he's made
of her. Yeah.
And there is certainly a noir flavor to the misogyny that I think underpins these relationships. And
It is a Wilder movie.
Yeah, in that ultimately, and this is, to Tucker, your point about stylistic moves that make it feel of its era, I think what really makes this film feel of its era is the ways wherein his infidelity and all of his shortcomings are basically erased in the face of the love this woman has for him. And he never has to reconcile with any ways in which his hyper masculine desires harm those around him, which I think is unfortunate in a film that is otherwise quite sensitive and complicated. I really like the exchange between Wick and Helen about what do we do with Don, basically expressing the two avenues you have, either the tough love or the coddling, and they're talking about how they've tried both. And how the film sensibly ends is with Helen basically venerating Don as he has this what feels to me a very rushed and peculiar detox into the first step of like a best-selling novelist's career. I find it incredibly strange, and I find the relationships very unsatisfying, especially through a modern lens. Of course, I could textualize it within the social values of the noir and of the era in which the film was produced. But it does definitely temper this feeling, this perennial feeling that courses through the narrative otherwise.
We do have to have our Hollywood ending where everything is right with the world.
We must have that.
Everything works out for our characters in the end, and no big deal about that whole alcoholism thing. It's done and over with. He's
and
good as new
suicide
now.
and
don't worry about it. No, don't worry about any of that. He's good as new. His girlfriend's back, and we're riding off into the sunset now. That is an issue I have with a lot of films of this era, particularly those that do try and tackle heavier subject matter. My mind thinks back to the original Nightmare Alley, which is also about this man in a downward spiral, but since we are under the Hays Code, we have to be like, oh, but it all works out for him in the end, and also here's a happy ending, and he got the girl too. Like it's a lot of that, and I think it really does undermine the rest of the content of the film.
Mm-hmm. It's
think,
so difficult. Oh, go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think the reason that it sticks out is because I don't mind that it's a happy ending. I think the idea of finding support in those that love you and working towards a healthier future is a good bow to leave it on. Yeah, it feels a little bit corny and of its era, but I also don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's the speed at which this ending rockets towards us that I'm like, okay, I guess it's a Paramount picture, and then I just like leave them like, whatever, it's of the time. But it really does kill the momentum that the film has, because I think it is getting to its most stylistically and thematically interesting as we're wrapping up. We're getting like basically horror sequences, and he's tripping on his own alcoholism for like the last 15 minutes of the film, and then Helen comes and happy ending. Write your book. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
That's
If
not
this
where the
was-
story was paced out to go. Yeah.
Well, exactly, because it was
Yeah.
paced out to lead that direction.
Yeah.
But that needed a couple more scenes of him struggling with Helen to really come to terms with the fact that this is a problem and he needs to work better. And then he's just like, but he just like sort of like, oh, yeah, it's a problem. I'll be better in the future. And it's like, Paramount Picture.
It is an hour and 40-minute runtime, like one of the shorter movies we've watched. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't know, wartime rationing don't got so much film.
Maybe.
They were
Maybe
the
not.
boys,
Let's
the
be
boys
real.
over in Germany need it.
they were rationing their cigarettes like crazy when they shot this thing. All the bar scenes, Wilder was like, you save the butts. We might need to do as another take.
They also would melt down film stock for silver content. So that might not be super far from the truth, but also like Billy Wilder
Come
can
on.
get an extra 10 minutes of film on this thing.
I had another section that I realized that I didn't bring up when we were talking about the stylistic flair that Billy Wilder brings to this, and it's maybe one of the odder sequences of the film visually. It's when he's at the opera, and then the opera singers all turn into like his hanging raincoat.
Oh,
and they're
that's
like
really
all
cool.
swinging back and forth, and then we like X-ray into the pocket, and it has like a bottle of whiskey in there. I'm like, that's a really visually interesting way to like
And-
to dial us into Don's state of mind, to
And-
where his mind's at that like when he's like 20 minutes into this opera that he decided to go to for some
That's
reason.
that's where my mind would be too. Oh,
Yeah.
don't worry.
Yeah.
Not only is it's not just any opera. I don't know if you caught. It's a specific. It is a drinking song from a famous opera. They've got the drinks going around, and it's also a flashback. I think the flashbacks are a little hard to tell when they are happening and when they're not happening, which is not a minus for me. Because
Well, they do a little
But,
flashback
like,
time.
flashback. But the getting in the mindset of flowing in and out of the past
Yeah.
and the present of a drunk guy, that it works for me. And yeah, you're right that the we get these crazy visual effects when he's in a flashback, but then we get them later when he's hallucinating too. So I think there can be a formal reading of what's going on based off of that.
Yeah.
Can I talk
did
about the
have-
hospital scene? Because that's where I'm gonna
Yeah,
get
go
into
for
like
it. Absolutely.
the hospital scene is, I think, one of the more harrowing scenes in the film, where Bim, who, at least in this biography, and I'm gonna agree with it, is presented as an ostensibly gay man.
Yeah, he's coded that way. I can see that.
He's gay coded in this film.
The gays code.
The gays.
Oh, how has no? I'm sure someone done
Someone
that.
definitely has.
That should be like a huge thing. It's like look at the modern day. It's the gays code, not the Hayes code. God damn it! I just came up with that.
Tucker's helping the anti-woke warriors right now.
Yeah, honestly.
No, but I meant it as like a reclaiming as a positive thing. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
In this hospital scene, I think is where the connection that's kind of formed, or this like fearful connection that is formed between Burnham and Bim, where Don is like, he sees a gay man, and where he is refusing to see himself. He refuses to accept his own homosexuality, which at least in the book is like causing a lot of his torment, and a lot like his initial drinking comes from that, but he's still also a writer. It's in this scene where the film does the most to try to convince us that there is a sexual tension within Burnham that isn't fully on display, and that we're not allowed to show, but it still exists in this scene. And Bim's coding, I think, is what like brings it in, and his like ambivalence kind of to the well-being of his patients, but also his like wizened like, you'll be back, and oh, you think you've got it bad? You weren't around here when it was prohibition. That was when it was really bad. Like that line really pissed off the industry. But
It really did, yeah.
I think that it's kind of there in Bim's thing. It might be a stretch, but I think that the hospital scene does a little bit to bring this extra context into the film, which if you're from 1945 and you read the book, like you're gonna know this. So, but we're not.
I really just sort of masochistically enjoy, or sadistically rather enjoy, just how tormenting Bim is of Don. He's like, pretty soon you're gonna start seeing tiny turkeys wearing straw hats. He's just fucking with him. He's like,
Well,
what is
monkeys
this guy's
coming out of the
deal?
walls.
Monkeys coming out of the wall. What is this guy's deal? Why is he being such an asshole towards Don? But, I guess it's a thing of like, yeah, he's fucking had it up to here with all these drunks coming in and not knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
But if we're wrapping up here, I'll sort of softball that one. I did want to get into the alcohol industry's reaction to this film, which is maybe what I found most interesting digging through the trivia. Unless anyone else has any final thoughts.
I'm going to ask to lead up to this trivia, since I know the response. Tucker and Abram, what do you think the response was?
This is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol is so cool. Look at this guy. He's drinking a lot. He's giving us money. I don't know.
It's true. They loved it. Now, what about the reaction from temperance groups, anti-alcohol people? What do you think they thought of it?
Same thing.
Same
Everyone
thing. It
loved
was
this
awesome.
movie.
No, see, I think that the film would be viewed, if anything, as it's glorifying drinking. I'm gonna go. Alcohol groups loved it, and temperance groups thought it was bad. The inverse, what the film would probably want those groups to feel.
No, well, it was actually just everyone didn't like it. Everyone was getting everyone. Alcohol industry was like, oh my god, we're demonizing alcohol. We're demonizing our product here. I can't believe it. They apparently tried to pay off Paramount Pictures with $5 million in 1945 money. Yeah, exactly.
$5 million. That's what 65 made last weekend domestically.
Apparently Billy Wilder also said, yeah, they offered it to the studio and they didn't take it. But if they offered it to me personally, I would have taken the money and stopped making the movie.
That's the kind of guy Wilder was. But this is all before the film came out.
Yes. There was also negative reaction from temperance groups who took issue with some of the moments in the film, like Bim's line that we said earlier about how prohibition caused a lot of people to become alcoholics. There's also a line sort of deriding the narrow-minded small-town teetotalers, which the Ohio Temperance Board did not enjoy. So yeah, just across the board, all the establishment hated this film.
But then when it came out, the crazy thing is that they actually switched around and went from hating it to really loving it. Like Seagram's, the gin manufacturer, came out in full support of the movie, saying, and I quote, they said that this is definitive proof that some men should not drink. And when there was once the test screenings kind of came up good, once they got all the right elements in there, and the studio executives realized that this is actually a movie that is good. They started a really big advertising campaign, really heavily leaning on the mouse and the bat. They really went in on this, and they're like, this is a movie that's going to make you think, because there's not enough time to explain what it means, but if you pay attention, you'll get it. This is
the first thinking man's movie to hit American screens.
The first thinking man's movie.
The thinking man's movie.
I'm not shitting you. This is what the PR agents at the time were doing. But they came around to the film received very little censorship. Like Pennsylvania is the only state to even consider censoring it. Everyone else was like, yeah, this is totally good. You can play the whole thing. And Pennsylvania was like, the blood on the wall from the mouse is too much. You got to get rid of that. But none of the parts about the alcoholism or the prostitution.
Totally real bat and totally real mouse.
I love that you can see the wires on the bat flying around. Oh, it's good.
Yeah, looks pretty bad today, but I think the biography tries to make the argument that back then you were not used to seeing so many special effects, so it was probably okay.
Fair point. If we were to wrap it up here, because it feels like we are, I can't help but notice that we were heavy on the trivia this episode, and I have to question why. And I think it's because I don't know how deeply you can delve into all the thematic content of this film. It's it wears its themes on its sleeve, I really think. And in the moment, I'm like, hey, this is pretty surprising for 1945, pretty refreshing to see, pretty interesting to read all of these things about this film that has fallen by the wayside in the popular context, talking about Best Picture winners, but was quite controversial at the time. And I think I understand why it has fallen by the wayside now. Is that yes, it did derive this reaction at the time, but ultimately it's good. Like I don't think any of these things are necessarily bad. Any of these elements are bad. We talked about our issues with it, with the pacing of the ending, and some of the underutilization of side characters. But ultimately, I'm just like across the board, pretty good. I'm gonna think about it. I'm gonna remember it back and be like, oh yeah, that was the movie. I'm gonna think about it like I think about Gentleman's Agreement. Essentially, I'm like, that was the movie that was about X, and it was like pretty progressive and surprising for its time. But ultimately, I don't think about it a lot outside of that, and that's where I think I'm really coming down on The Lost Weekend. Good movie, but not like good enough in any factor to stick in my mind. Really.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
one,
and I think it's just I completely agree, and I think that that's even more apparent when you think of its situation in comparison to its peers, the acting and the directing. Like this is all it could be one of the greats that is constantly remembered. It's from Billy Wilder, and it's got this really heavy theme. And it's got a guy that does a great job, but I'd never heard of Ray Milland. If I'm talking about Wilder movies, it's gonna be like ninth on my list that I'm going to talk about. And in terms of its contemporaries, like even if I was going to go for something more thematic minded, I would go for Gentleman's Agreement over this, and that's got Gregory Peck in it. I think that it slipped down, and I think that's a shame because in terms of Billy Wilder's filmography, I think this definitely does stick out as very distinct. Now I haven't seen his entire filmography, but in terms of seeing most of the top ones, this definitely does feel different, and it is surprising for the time, but on a very personal subjective level, it doesn't bring too much to me. I don't feel like I learned anything watching this movie because I knew that alcoholism was bad and that you should find support in the people that love you. And I do hope from these movies that delve into thematics that I'm going to be learning a new perspective on this. And I just don't think that I did, but people in 1945 probably did, and that was the intended audience. So it's not like that's necessarily a flaw of the film that, 80 years later, I'm not like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm learning something new about alcoholism from this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys, but I also think that there's something to be said for just it being a compelling story to watch unfold too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of really interesting situations we end up in, like when we go to the club and we don't have enough money, so Don steals the pocketbook. I mean, these are sort of simple situations we end up going through, but between that and trying to pawn the typewriter or ending up in the hospital and the escape from it and the sort of tense stick up at the liquor store, these moments as they're sort of spiraling into each other, I think for the most part kept me engaged by the narrative. Yeah. And through that lens, there is something to hold on to here, especially when we bring in the performance, especially when we bring in some of the technical elements and some of the dialogue. I agree with you. I think this is a good movie, but I do also think that it might be hampered a little bit by the reputation of the people who made it, because I do think that on a plot level, in terms of the daringness of what it's depicting as it was depicting it, there is a very interesting film here. I just do think that it's been dulled over time.
Yeah.
I'll say that this film has stayed in my mind for years now because of these like extra textual scholarly elements that I find myself really interested in. But I'm in agreement. I think that it is a good movie. It is entertaining to watch, and it's like I can't stop watching it even though I'm unsettled by what I'm seeing. But I think Abram kind of very right about the female characters just kind of existing as these very standard 1940s noir characters that don't have so much on their own. They exist to live for the other characters in the story. And in a more modern film, I would hope to see fully realized female characters, basically. That's what we want,
What a shock.
Oh my God. Should we give this thing a score?
Yes.
Absolutely.
We shall.
I punched mine in. You guys
I
ready?
got mine.
I have mine in.
I'm ready.
3, 2, 1. We're all very close. We're all very close. The score we gave it is a 7.5. The point breakdown, starting from the bottom, Abram gave it a 7.1. Tanner gave it a 7.2. Tucker gave it a 7.6. And I gave it a 7.9. So we're all in 7.
Whew. Well, we got a tie to break here.
We got a shootout.
A 4-way tie to break.
Lord almighty. Well, let's start with the film at the bottom of the list in spot number 54, Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
Gandhi.
Well, here
Gandhi.
I'll read out all 4 ties. So that
Oh,
we
sure.
just gotta-
Yeah, go ahead, do that.
Gandhi, and then The Life of Emile Zola, then Platoon, and then Platoon.
Yeah, the fourth
Twice.
entry being
Platoon.
this movie.
The Lost
Yes,
Weekend.
yeah. Okay.
No Gandhi. What do we say
Gandhi.
about this?
Would you still want to do hands above or below?
I'm gonna be honest with you. Gandhi is so far out of my memory, but I am gonna go above Gandhi because I think that there's a more unique texture to this film.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Above
Gandhi was a technical achievement from Attenborough and a good performance from Ben Kingsley, but we have a dearth of not a dearth, the opposite of that,
A girth.
of epic biopics
Girth.
in our best picture lineup. So
Yeah.
I could put above Gandhi as well.
Solely runtime. This movie's shorter.
Fair point.
And that's always better.
It's probably about half, actually.
Hey, you
It's
can watch
about half.
You can watch 2 of these in this week. Okay.
Yeah, I'll go above as well. I think you guys are right that even though I think Gandhi's I think Gandhi's a better movie, although my score might not reflect that. Yeah, I'll go above.
Okay.
And I think also above The Life of Emile Zola because I think that's kind of one of the earliest examples of just like a biopic, and
Yeah.
those don't stick with me.
See,
Yeah.
I don't agree.
I don't agree either.
Yeah.
I think
No,
Life of Mazola is better than this one. I don't know what it is about that freaking movie. I really like Life of Emile Zola. Why?
I think with The Life of Emile Zola, my thought on it is, far removed from it now, is that it's a good script that has some really interesting ideas that aren't always executed on as good as they should be. And I think that is true of The Lost Weekend as well, but less true, significantly less true.
Yeah, it's,
So-
it's a much more focused film, and it
Yeah.
also does feel more distinct. This is the only alcoholism movie we've got on this list.
Sure, yeah.
That is true, but I think that the sort of sum of A Life of Emile Zola's parts is a more
Yeah.
impressive achievement in my opinion. And I think the ways we come to really identify with Emile Zola as he finds status and then almost finds too much status and has to reconcile with that. I think the journey that Emile Zola goes on and the ways that's placed into the context of a larger political intrigue is more enrapturing in my mind than what we do, despite the focus. You guys are totally right about the focus, but I think the scale and quite similarly prescient ideas of activism as portrayed in Life of Emile Zola, to me, these films can be compared quite one-to-one in a lot of respects.
They're from the same canon. They're both made by German emigre filmmakers working in the Hollywood system. Like the dudes who made these movies were talking to each other.
I'm going Zola above.
I
Zola
kind of want
above.
to change my answer though, because Tanner brings up good points, and maybe I'd like. I have seen this movie twice for class, and I only watched Emile Zola once for class.
I just think that while Zola does have, more interesting ideas, I think they are less thoroughly explored than perhaps the less interesting ideas, but still quite cool for the time of The Lost Weekend, which are explored better. So you really have to find the balance there. But I'm gonna go Lost Weekend above Zola. But I honestly I could be convinced, but that's what I'm feeling right now.
I'm gonna be convinced. I'll change my vote. I'm putting Lost Weekend above Emile Zola.
Okay.
Now against
okay.
Platoon, I famously gave
Platoon?
Not Platoon.
I gave Platoon a bad score, so I'm gonna put. I don't like Platoon that much, but
Tanner?
above.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. But actually, I think I lowered my score on Platoon. But what the fuck? I'm below Platoon.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Below
Well, then
Platoon.
that's a spot, because I also agree below Platoon. Say
Below
that 10 times
Splatoon.
fast.
There you have it. We
That's
are
an
going.
That's
Good.
okay.
Should have.
Very efficient deliberation tonight.
Yeah, honestly.
This film, The Lost Weekend, is going at spot number 53 on the list. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm actually the 7 that I was like, this film is gonna get a 7.5. I was like, it's in the 7.5 to 8.2 range. We'll see. It's on the lower end, which, well, we hit a lot of points as to why that is. But thank you guys for such an inspired discussion.
Yes.
I do believe we get to. Oh, yes.
Oh, brother man, it's time for that wheel.
Ray Milland, or Don Birnam, I should say, had put his hands into the fate of the bottle or the circles, but we have a different circular.
Circle.
That's true.
A god.
Well,
that we
while
worship.
it is a circle, there is a beginning, and we are nearing the end, folks.
Yeah.
Nice.
And we're drunk. that,
If that didn't come across. Timo, spin that funky wheel, white boy.
All right.
my line.
You ready, Tanner?
Ready?
You ready to sing? Here it goes.
Wheel, wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital? Is it on real? Wheel, wheel, what's your deal?
And the wheels deal is number 6.
Number 6.
Number 6.
Okay.
So we're in the past, I think, right?
Yeah, we are
deep
going
in
to the past because most of our list, over half of it at this point, or the 7 that we have remaining, are older films. The gap being between Forrest Gump in 94 and All the King's Men in 49. So there's a very, very significant gap there. But number 6 does bring us even farther in the past to the Best Picture winner from the 4th Academy Awards in 1931, directed by Wesley Ruggles, starring Irene Dunne, Estelle Taylor, Richard Dix. This is Cimarron.
Excuse me?
Cimarron.
This man's name is Dick Dix?
That's crazy, bro.
That's nuts. Some Cimarron, you said,
Clocking
Tucker?
in at a breezy 2 hours and 3 minutes. So that's not too bad.
Okay.
3 or 30? What'd you say? 3 or 30?
2 hours 3.
Okay.
No, one, two. Wait, yes,
Wait.
2 hours and 3 minutes.
Okay,
Take a
okay,
breath.
okay. Do we know
math.
what this movie's about? Is it like a Western or something like that?
All right, you want me to read it?
Have any
Yeah,
of you
please.
seen it? Because I haven't seen it.
No.
No.
When the government opens up the Oklahoma Territory for settlement, restless Yancey Kravitz claims a plot of the free land for himself and moves his family there from Wichita. A newspaperman, lawyer, and just about everything else, Kravitz soon becomes a leading citizen of the boomtown of Osage. Once the town is established, however, he begins to feel confined once again and heads for the Cherokee Strip, leaving his family behind. During this and other absences, his wife Sabra must learn to take care of herself and soon becomes prominent in her own right.
Okay. Okay. So we got
This is
we got
a
a bit of
feminism picture.
we got a bit of a Western epic here, or some different characters spanning the settlement of the American Midwest because it's in Missouri or whatever.
It's like Texas.
Yeah.
Cool.
God,
Alright.
this episode's gonna be so frontier mythcore. I can't wait to talk about it.
Oh, we're gonna throw up that classic picture of Manifest Destiny. You know it. You know the one.
We don't
You
put
know-
images in our videos, Tanner.
No.
That would require
Everyone that's been to a liberal arts college can conjure that image in their mind.
Well, anyone
anyone
who
who-
at high school can conjure
Middle
that
school. Middle school is where I saw that picture. When we were talking about, we played some Oregon Trail. We put the Manifest Destiny painting up on the smart board. Oh, baby.
And it wasn't until 8, 9 years later where the teacher's like, actually, maybe Manifest Destiny, not such the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
We shall see
Anyway.
what Cimarron is all about. Simmer on that thought. We'll see you all next time for the quest for the bestest. Until
Look
then,
at
stay cool, keep warm, and peace.